Yo, what's up? Coming to you live, 6 p.m. West Coast time, 9 p.m. East Coast time. The trades. How's everyone doing? As you know, we're going to start at the 3 minute mark. We're just warming it up. Tell your friends, come to the Profo One channel on YouTube or the Rob Swift channel. We're gonna have a great show, guys. Let us know where you're tuning in from. What country, state, city. If you represent a crew, if you're a DJ, if you're a dancer, and if you're tuning live from Instagram, go ahead and go to Rob Swift's YouTube channel. That way you can join the conversation in the chat. We're going to start the show in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Let us know where you're from. All right. We're going to start the show in 1 minute. Yo, what's up? It's Shadow Rock and Pro for one of the Floor Gangs and Knuckleneck Tribe, and you're watching the Trades show about breaking hip hop and the business of. How's everyone doing out there? Oh man, it's been a while since I've been on YouTube and just talking about hip hop again. As you know, here on the Pro for One channel, and as well, broadcasting from the Rob Swift channel. What I usually do is I basically go on Instagram right here at PROFO underscore FLGZ. And then if you are tuning live from there, if you want to join the chat, you got to go to the Rob Swift YouTube channel or to the Pro for One channel. But usually on Instagram, I give my subjective takes, right? This is where I give my opinions. I do my old man rants and all that type of stuff. This past Monday, I had manual therapy from Seattle, and basically we talked about longevity in the dance scene. We talked about taking care of your body. We talked about what usually b-boys and b-girls do. We tend to send it and not kind of like and toughen up and don't really search our bodies to see when we're hurt, and that's what usually causes like long-term injury. You could check that interview out on my Profo One Instagram, PROFO underscore FLGZ. And that's again where I do more of my subjective takes, and I have a lot of crazy old man rants out there. But today is a little different. Today, the last time I was on here, I had Elephant Graveyard, and I did a reaction to one of the Red Bulls. So I had an interview with Elephant Graveyard, reaction to one of the Red Bull, actually both qualifiers. I did the Denver qualifier and I did the Seattle qualifier. But today, because this man has been all over the place, dropping gems, dropping good stuff, and he was on here before. He was on the trades before, but this time he was still working on this. this book. He was still working on it, called The City of Hip Hop, New York City, the Bronx, and a peace meeting. And since he's been doing this book tour and promoting the book, I was like, hey, we need to talk about hip hop, where it's going, kind of like having practitioners talk about the history, because a lot of people out there right now tend to be just more like scholars, journalists talk about the hip hop, but it's rarely you see practitioners talk about the history of hip hop. And when he said, hey, if we're going to talk about the book, we got to bring out the co-author. So without further ado, I'm bringing in Dr. Rasul Mowatt and DJ Rob Swift. Okay, where is it? Boom. There it is. Wait, what's going on? I want the brawlic arm. Okay, I don't know what happened. Hold on. Let's see what's going on here real quick. I don't know why it looks like that. Let me stop the scene here. I don't know. Okay. Technical difficulties. This is what happens when you, there you go. Boom. All right, cool. There it is. All
What
right.
up?
How's everyone doing?
Chilling.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
good. Good.
again, man, thanks for being here. I talked to you, Rob, and I was just like, yo, I want you on because like the clips you've been making, the shorts of your guys' interview promoting the book has been really good, because like a lot of the conversation, you tend to make the clips and talk about things that like normally like won't come up. There's the generic like hip hop history stuff or its argument, but you tend to go out, like take it and then make something, an educational tool out of it. And when I said that, it's like going to talk the book. We need to bring on the co-author. So, first of all, like most of the people, we're on the Rob Swift channel, right? But before we start the conversation, let's start with Dr. Mowatt and have a little of your history, because I don't think no one really talks about what you do. So, go at it, man. How'd you start this? How'd you start in maybe the DJ scene and then through academia?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that respect. Try to keep it brief on my end. Um, Coming from Chicago, mid 1980s, roughly about 1984, started getting equipment techniques by the end of that same year. So like most old DJs, we have some pretty old equipment when you sort of think about some of your first purchases that still sort of hold up to this present day. Um,
Yeah.
but of course, with coming from Chicago, Chicago was definitely steeped in house music at this particular time period. Um, this is, of course, a little bit after the likes of Frankie Knuckles, and then eventually Ron Hardy had already transitioned to becoming the main DJ of what was the music box. So, of course, there was the warehouse and then the music box. And then by the time that Ron Hardy is really pumping out the music box, Frankie Knuckles transitioned to a bigger club called the Power Plant. So, as a team going to those venues and being inspired by the sound, also on the radio waves, they started to have house music DJs perform on a radio station that no longer exists called WBMX. And they had the Hot Mix 5 that was on there, rotating different DJs out of the what would be the Hot Mix 5. Farley Jackmaster Funk was one of the big names of the Hot Mix 5, and you would hear them Friday night and Saturday night do mixes. And so I would hear this sort of mixing, the blending, some occasional scratches if it was like Mario smoking Diaz or um, and some other ones. And of course, going out, getting into clubs, you would sort of also hear, the music while being in the dance scene of house music. But it wasn't really until I think I saw the video for Shaka Khan's "I Feel for You"
Oh,
that you
okay.
physically see, DJing, right?
Right.
Um, and so you start, on your own, you start putting things together because you're enjoying this particular culture, not just as a sort of attendee. You want to kind of now become a part of it, right? And so I knew quickly, I already had turntables at, the crib, and you put them down on the table somewhere together. And, you had an amp, some of us had those old types of ants that were also radio, radios on top and that type of
Right,
thing.
right, yeah, yeah.
So you do the soldering and all that. You go to Radio Shack and you get what you think is the right mixer. It was a 4 channel and they had no crossfader and stuff like that. So all during that sort of 1980s was a trial run of sort of picking up all those things, trying it out, of course, in your home, realizing that you bought the wrong equipment. You get the right equipment, so the first turntables I had weren't techs. The first mixer I had was not the proper, mixer from, I'm right now drawing a blank on some of Gemini. Gemini
Right.
was the mixer to finally get after you left like Radio Shack. And so by the end of the 1984 year and going into 98.5, now I finally had the full setup. And me and some of my other friends were also into DJing. And we started to be able to go and do venue sets, church basements and some other sort of spots. I have to sort of acknowledge my not necessarily next door neighbor, but across the street neighbor who eventually moves on the block, who is none other than Theo Parrish, who is well known in the house music scene. We all sort of learned DJing and was able to sort of spin at different sort of spots here and there and develop our skills. And some of us were able to make connections and take it further into production. And some just remained as DJs like myself whenever I had the time to do that, especially when I went down to Urbana-Champaign for college. So that's some history, at least in terms of DJing.
Yeah.
Um,
So how'd you get into like academia now, right? Because
yeah,
we'll blend it all in. We'll blend it all in. We'll blend it all in.
yeah, no, man. Academia wasn't even, it wasn't direct. Music was probably way more direct, of a thing. But academia was less of a plan or intent. Academia was really coming through my community work that emerged down in Urbana-Champaign in college. I was running a community center with different sort of programs and activities for the community. Some researchers from community wanted me to come and do guest lecturing and also assist them on some projects that they wanted to sort of learn more and maybe publish about. And the next thing I know, I kept doing more and more guest lectures. They made recommendations about maybe going to grad school. They talked about a special program that they had where for practitioners like myself, if I supervise a student
Okay.
of theirs, I would get free college credit.
Oh, all right.
It was grad school credits. And so I supervised enough students to, complete a master's degree and a PhD.
Wow.
But it was not the plan at all.
Right.
Again, I was just work in the community and then working with those students. And then I just started taking those classes just to sort of, I think eventually leave the city government that I was working for and then move over to nonprofits. And that didn't work out in terms of nonprofits. But while I was still sort of finishing the doctoral degree, I started to learn more about the profession of, being a professor in the subject matter that I was sort of pursuing. And so I transitioned out from working for the city government for academia. So that, yeah, again,
Wow.
less of a plan and less of a tent. I was still DJing at the
Yeah.
time in Urbana-Champaign and up in Chicago at the Funky Voodoo Lounge as sort of the same time period. So even while I'm working full time, but also going taking classes, I'm still still in the art.
Yeah. No, so that's what's dope because like there's more and more like actual like hip hoppers that are in academia now, which is really good. Shout out to
Yeah,
Why Not. Shout out to Marcel Durden. Who are actually practitioners. They're not just like, oh, we're fans of hip hop. We're actually know how to do something of the elements. So, and then when I was having the conversation with Rob, he was like, "Oh, Rasul knows everything." So, I mean, so if it sounds like you're like this is one thing I noticed about the academics that are hip hoppers. They tend to like remember everything. They have like they absorb information. I obviously it's like probably because you're DJing too. Probably what records you could just pull from your shelves and knowing what is what and blah 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 blah. So this is what's going to be fascinating for me because I never really explored kind of like the geography of the Bronx as much as what causes what, and that's what this book is dense, man. For me, this book. I mean, for academics, I'm sure it's not that dense, but for me, I'm like, whoa, because usually it's like, shout out to Jeff Chang too, who's been on the show as well. But that book was like already 25, 26 years ago that came out, so it's not really, and it's very like just story based of like, okay, this is the experience. Well, this is not just story based. This is just like kind of this A, B, and C, and like what caused this and that. So, how did you guys? Before I start asking the questions, how did you guys link up as far as
Rasul, you're much better at answering this question
writing
than
this
I am.
book?
I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I mean, we both had our paths, and and specific to the art, I was not able to sort of transition it to something to, keep at it. I remember telling Rob this story a long time ago when we first met. I had a chance to either go to Berlin to DJ out there, but it was shaky, but still, nonetheless, that was an offer, or go to college. And so, I kind of made a choice just based upon what I was hearing, because, just thinking about it at 18 years old, going to another city and especially another country at that time, you had no idea, but but nonetheless, the love for the art was always there. Um, so I always wanted to integrate it, in some way, through the work, and primarily, as you were just saying, the skills to do, to listen to music and sort of hear the connections, to do record hunting and digging, which took sort of enormous amounts of time, archiving your own record collection, to make sense of it, even prior to sort of the digital space, right? Just trying
Right.
to put it out there and in that way. But just to kind of get into specifically, what brought us together was myself and a colleague, Nicole Siegel at Indiana University. We were running a series of conferences called Critical Ethnic Studies conferences, and we did not want it to make it a traditional academic conference. We wanted to bring artists and others who also had a body of knowledge to share. And so the second Critical Ethnic Studies conference we did, the sort of artists that we wanted to bring to have a lecture, not just a sort of performance during the entertainment portion, but to actually have a discussion with Rob. Um, and it wasn't even my suggestion; it was somebody on our committee that brought it up because at this particular time I didn't know that Rob was doing guest lecturing at the New School and some other particular spaces, but this person did know because I was already familiar with Rob and the Executioners because they had come to Chicago and did host of shows, but one in particular I always remember was at the Virgin Music Store when there was all four of them there. Rest in peace to
Right.
Rock Raid. Yeah. On one of my record, shopping hunting days, they just happened to be there doing a promo for their show later that evening. So we brought Rob in. It was a huge success. People loved the sort of regular sessions that people normally sort of hear about, but they also loved this particular lecture that he provided in terms of the history of the art and also just how to actually do the art, right?
Mhm.
And then later that evening was a traditional entertainment portion, but this was not the entertainment portion. He was giving a straight up lecture. And so then the next year, when we were supposed to have another artist perform, they backed out last minute, and so we brought Rob back. And this time, Rob brought Mr. Sinister, and so it was a tag team that they performed, but also Rob had another discussion, with the group. I had talked to Rob both times, and And after the second time, I brought him to another conference to be a keynote. So a completely separate conference. That was also a huge success that, still to this day, a lot of people who attended it still bring it up, because he was more so talking about the craft and also walking people through some of the techniques.
Right.
It was actually a pretty good sound setup too. If you remember that, Rob,
I do.
It was an incredible.
It's up on my YouTube page.
Yeah, because
people could watch it there.
Because we were in a tech building, so they had a entire sort of like interactive screen up, so it was able to really tap into what Rob was not just going through, but also showing,
right,
demonstrating, and then having people come up on the stage to
that's
do
dope.
it. Yeah. And then so we kept in touch. I thought of it as just a way, one, just to continue to have strong connect for hopefully some other sort of speaking engagement, but also as Rob was developing these classes and these guest lecturing to different universities in New York, at some point maybe I would come out, and just check out some of those. Unfortunately, COVID-19 ends up hitting. So we're talking about stuff that was just before COVID-19, 2016, 2017.
Right.
This is all developing. So 2020, it was probably a year that we were going to connect to do something. It hit, and it impacted and affected all of us in a number of different ways, especially in terms of being able to be out and sort of perform and do stuff or speak and that type of thing. And so
right.
End of the year, while Rob was doing two different things, one of which Rob can sort of get into was tackling this sort of emerging narrative that was happening on the internet about history and culture. But on the other end was coming on to shows like this, and one of which he did in early 2021 was with DJ B-Man out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was in that lecture when DJ B-Man asked him about some of the other sort of situations and conditions in New York City that might have had some influence on hip hop. And sort of Rob had this sort of discussion that was specifically on this unofficial but official policy called benign neglect from Patrick Moynihan, who had different hats. He ended up as a New York senator just before Hillary Clinton became the New York state senator. But by this time, he was like an ambassador to New York, to the United States. He had been in Congress just before this, representing Brooklyn. So he was all over the place for multiple presidencies, from Kennedy up to that, like I said, just Hillary Clinton, man. But talk about benign neglect, and the benign neglect was a memo that he drafted that became sort of distributed, that basically said we focus enough on race and society, specifically reflecting on the civil rights movement and the achievements that were trying to be made to correct sort of past wrongs. And he was saying pull back on that. And this is like late 60s. So we're talking about things that hadn't even taken effect. So at the same time he's saying this, and we transitioned into early 70s, this is how we then began to see public hospitals getting closed down, public schools getting closed down, all these sort of support systems. This is how we, Rob, I think, was making a connection about in the public schools removing certain programming like music, and so this is what's emerging out of benign neglect. Stop putting resources into the improvement around race. And so when I heard that lecture, I knew how we could collaborate on a writing project. I knew I had an entryway because I was already doing research work on different cities around policing and public housing.
Perfect guess, because I was gonna, I'm gonna try to get deep, because there's a lot of stuff that not a lot of people because when people usually go into hip hop, they come from where they stand from. So if I was a teenage kid and it was like 2002, that's my entry, and whatever was on the radio, whatnot, you know what I mean, or whoever's around me. And then it's just like hearsay. oh, the history of hip hop is hearsay, depending on if they're in that type of environment, right?
Right.
So that's just where, like, I guess these arguments kind of come to, because I mean, it's just like guys like Rob's been doing it you've been around since the '80s, so you even saw it come to Chicago, right? Like you said, you saw the Shaka Khan video with Melly Mel, and it's just like, oh, that's what
Yeah.
that is, right? But because
Yeah.
you were exposed more to the house scene. Like
Right.
that was already going on. And again, I want to tie that in because not a lot of hip hoppers talk about house as well. And I have a lot of house dancer friends and viewers. So, I mean, they usually don't. Again, a lot of these people are watching are the oldest is maybe 30, right? Like, so this would be a good exploration of, like, kind of like the cross culture, cross music genres. So with that being said, and I know, Rob, you've gone on so many interviews talking about the same thing, where just like, you're online, you're defending yourself, you're defending the history of hip hop, which is like, and even for me, like, I've been caught up, I've been called certain derogatory terms of recent that used to not be derogatory and been clipped myself. But and I've had like Dancing Doug, one of the original Herc dancers, and Sasa on here, and I've had Track Two, so I've had I'm more like, it doesn't matter. Like, I just
I
want to hear the
sat next
history.
to I sat next to Track 2 on a flight from New York to
Uh-oh.
Cleveland. And yo, I basically interviewed that dude the whole flight. And he was so cool about answering my questions. I just picked his brain the entire flight.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, and
Sorry to
that's the thing.
interrupt you.
No, because this there's a lot of, and that's a problem, because no one, like you've said before, Rob, on your posts, like, no one kept record. Like, and at the same time, there's memory. There's, if they were under some type of influence, is their ego trying to, I was the best, because like when I used to go, it's like I was the best in my block, no one could beat me. Then you go to another place, I was the best in my block, no, like,
Right.
okay, how can you all be the best in your block? And if it
Exactly.
depends if you stayed in your block, or if you were like Charlie Rock, who considered himself a nomad. Like, I was one of the only guys from Gun Hill going over here and going over here and going to the west, going to the south. So, and at the same time, when he stopped, like, so there's all these things. And shout out to Pluto 7, like, and Sir Nolan Rad, we're more like, let's try to gather up all these stories and see if there's a common denominator, because that will mostly be the truth and stuff like that. So that's why I like, Rasul, you being here and talking about the thing you just talked about. I guess my first question is, a lot of people are like, it's from the South and this and that. I'll just do this, because I even heard elder from a graffiti elder from I live in the Bay Area, right? I live in San Francisco. So I have a graffiti elder said, well, the Black Panthers are from Oakland. We've had strutting and boogaloo and funk. We threw parties, right? So we have a dance, and we have, graffiti. We had graffiti. We had, we were writing on the wall. Why is, like, but I would still argue, well, it really still started in New York, even though there's these elements. Why New York? Out of, like, yeah, I'll just put myself where I live instead of talking about other places. Why, since because he was like, well, the Black Panthers, that Black Spades is like copying the Black Panthers, or they're like, inspired by the Black Panthers. Why not here in the Bay Area? Why in New York? Right?
Well, that benign neglect memo that Rasul was referencing, written by Patrick Moynihan, submitted to the then president, Richard Nixon, in 1970, January, got leaked by March by the New York Times. So now this memo became public. And in it becoming public, the masses, people, the citizens of this country basically started to understand and get hip, excuse the pun, to why certain conditions were the way they were in marginalized neighborhoods and areas, not just in New York City, but throughout the country, and why other regions of the country were in great condition. Let's just take, for example, if you pull up right now pictures of the Bronx, 1970s, your viewers will see rubble, garbage, buildings that are condemned, that are unlivable, yet there were residents in a lot of these buildings not being able to take showers and having to get water from fire hydrants outside of the building in the dead of winter. Why were these conditions the way they were? Now we started to become aware through this leaked memo, courtesy of the New York Times, of what was happening in New York City, and how, again, this memo wasn't by decree. It wasn't like a memo that was law, but it informed a lot of the policies that became law in places like the Bronx. You could see right now these pictures. And who was growing up in the Bronx in that craziness is the word that comes to my mind. Immigrants from the Caribbean, from Puerto Rico, immigrants like my father from South America. My father migrated to New York City the same year that Kool Herc did, 1969, from Colombia, right? And then you had Southerners. Then you had Southerners from Mississippi, North Carolina, Atlanta, Virginia, migrating up to New York City. New York City, since its founding, has been a hub for opportunity. But it just so happens that a lot of these families came here during a time when the city was a victim of this benign neglect memo, this memo that informed a lot of these policies. For example, redlining, defunding city services like the police, the fire department, which has a lot to do with why in those pictures you see burnt out buildings,
Yeah.
right?
The insurance
So,
scams and stuff like that. Yeah.
right, exactly. So now that this memo's been leaked by the New York Times and it's in the paper, you could read about it. We, looking back, myself and Rasul wanted to use that as a touchstone for what sparked a kid like Grandmaster Flash to pick up a turntable, a teenager, and use it as an instrument instead of a guitar
Right.
or a drum kit. So it's all connected. Hip hop is a result of a lot of co-occurrences, and it's not just this creative culture. It's a culture that was happening and created indirectly. I don't like to say directly created. This whole narrative and folklore of the 1973 August 11th party,
Right.
courtesy of Kool Herc. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but to condense a culture as complex as hip hop to this one party on one day is just doing a disservice to the history of New York City
Yeah.
throughout the 1970s. And
Yeah.
so that's what I'm trying to do when I'm getting on these podcasts right as the pandemic was ending. I'm seeing these debates happening on social media. People that are nationalists that consider themselves Black American and don't identify with the Black diaspora. I'm from the Black diaspora, or I should say my parents are, even though I was born here and I am American and obviously I'm Black, right? I also am super connected to my heritage as a Latino. My mom is from Cali, Colombia. My dad is from Chocó, Colombia. And guess what? Slave ships stopped in port cities, right? Like Colombia, like Brazil, and dropped off slaves there. And so seeing online or on social media someone disconnect themselves from the diaspora and on the basis of that disconnection, claim that hip hop is a Black American invention and completely excluding and erasing the other cultures that took part in why this whole thing came about in the first place. Meaning there were Latinos living next door to Black Americans in the Bronx. The Bronx was not just populated by Black Americans. You had Caribbeans, you had Caribbeans like Kool Herc, you had families from Barbados like Grandmaster Flash's family, but then you had Southerners there, Grounds of Theodore's families from the South, Jazzy J's families from the South, Tony Tone, the DJ for Cold Crush, is from the South. But then you had Latinos, Charlie Chase, Puerto Rican, Whipper Whip, Puerto Rican, Ruby D, Puerto Rican, DJ Disco Wiz, Puerto Rican, DJ Tex Hollywood, one of the original members of Zulu, Puerto Rican. So you had Caribbeans, Puerto Ricans, obviously Southern Blacks living in the Bronx in this environment that was neglected, right? And
Yeah.
so
So
knowing this,
just to give more context and just like kind of go back to the question, right? Like you answered that, but I could like let's say I'm debating. I could say, well, Oakland had Black Americans, they had Mexicans from south of the border, we had a lot of Asians. How come? And you know, in the '70s, if you this was a national thing that happened, right, where they pulled back. Well, how come we can't claim it? Why? You know what I mean? Like that because I want to get really intricate that most people are
yeah,
gonna miss. And because like, you know, because like I said, there was a OG elders like, well, we had Black Panthers first. Like, you know, before the Black Space, there was the Black Panthers. And there so how come not like let's say Bay Area, Oakland, how come New York, the Bronx specifically even?
Yeah,
I'll I'll just say this and then I'll let you jump in, Rasul. And
yeah,
Rasul, I know that you could definitely
Yeah, that's what I
add
want to
on a
hear.
lot
Yeah,
more
yeah,
because
yeah.
you're all about how cities work. But what I will say as a resident of New York City since 1972, specifically Queens, New York, what makes New York special, what makes the Bronx specifically the home of hip hop is the diversity. So in Watts, you had predominantly Black people, Black residents, but in the Bronx, you didn't have a predominant anything as far as like Black and brown people are concerned. You had a mixture. And when that mixture, I always say the Bronx was like a petri dish. So if you put all of these things inside of this petri dish, you can't help but grow some bugged out shit. You know what I mean? And that bugged out shit happened to be what we call hip hop in 2026.
yeah. No, I mean, so yeah, I mean, just to sort of chime in and continue that particular point. If we look at think about the demographics of New York, it had the largest and still it does has the largest demographic population in the entire United States, and it had it all the way starting back in the early 1800s. So it remained in that particular way. So when you have a critical mass of people within a city that does something, but I think to sort of connect it to I think what you're trying to sort of get us to get to is still why specifically New York. So all of a sudden in the 1960s and 1970s, you have this sort of collision of all these external forces that are then working on that demographic that's not necessarily working on the demographic in Atlanta, DC, or Philly, or Boston, or Chicago, who are also having similar demographics from the Caribbean, South America, as well as African Americans, and as well as white folks that are straight from United States as well for that particular time period, not necessarily immigrants that are coming in. You're having something happening in New York that's unique. First of all, it's still a port of entry for new immigrant population. So in the mid 1960s, you have a new federal mandate on immigration that finally opens the doorway. It lifts the quotas. And so while they go all over the United States, they first are coming through in New York City. And so because you already had immigrant populations, a lot of Italian white populations, a lot of Jewish populations, a lot of African American populations, but also old Caribbean populations already also in New York. Some of them just remained in New York because there was already a strong base there. They had restaurants now at this particular time period. They had laundry, shops, and they had, cafes, and they had and they were running ballrooms, which became important venues later on. That's one thing that's happening in New York that's not yet quite emerging in these other particular spaces in that same way during that time period. So this new wave from the law in the 1960s is mixing in with an already established community. And we touch on it in the book. The 1960s and 1970s is the first time that those groups that were already in New York prior to that law weren't being displaced, because all throughout the 20th century, there was these housing policies that kept having families move within a generation, so they never ever would get stable. So now all of a sudden you had these generations that finally had been in New York for some time now being stable, even if the conditions were horrible, like in Bronx. They were now stable. They did not have to move. And so now a child could literally live on the block and grow up all throughout up to high school in the same sort of housing community. This is how we get Kool Herc and his family being in that particular sort of public housing unit. Well, it was a mixed income unit, because it was a law that created rent stability, rent stabilization. That rent stabilization policy is unique to New York as a sort of state law. That law did not exist in other states to create that sort of stability. The other thing that begins to happen in New York, as a focus center, is it's the economic center for the United States. So while Washington D.C. is the political center for legislation, the New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street and so forth is a major driver. But the city itself is in the process of going through multiple bankruptcies. So all throughout the 70s, the city is taken from the teachers' pension to try to fund some gaps here and there. The police, who had their budget cut, is now, talking about a strike, and removing their services from, the city, because they're trying to figure out some way to stay afloat. And so by the mid 70s, New York is trying to appeal to the federal government for some funding, to Gerald Ford. So after Nixon gets removed from office, Gerald Ford takes over, and Ford, in a horrible sort of mistake, basically, because he's now trying to run for presidency, because he takes over for Nixon, he denies funding to the biggest city in the country that's going through bankruptcy, and he loses that election to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, comes in, he makes it a priority to come to New York City. So while Joe Conzo is taking pictures of the rubble, and has a famous photo of the Puerto Rican flag draped over some of the rubble, there's New York Times photographers that are taking pictures of the press conference that's happening in the Bronx, in the rubble, at this, same time, because he's trying to now win, favor from the state of New York and its residents. So there's all these, there's these factors. And I think that's what we were trying to do with the book is, while we want to talk about the culture, we're not trying to establish the book as giving the origin of the culture, because it's so hard to pin down an accurate sort of history, because you have some people who kind of exaggerate the truth. You have some people who
exactly kind of what I was saying before, like,
what I mean? But what we can do is talk about the circumstances.
So that's why why I was like, man, this is important, like, because
it's not happening nowhere else. So you don't have this major of a bankruptcy. Chicago is way more financially healthy, so it's not in bankruptcy. Boston is not, in Los Angeles is not in bankruptcy. Certain things are happening to certain populations. So when we think about Los Angeles, and San Francisco, they're starting to they're starting to shut down some of the plants that Filipino, Mexican, and Black laborers are working
Yeah.
in LA. But that's not the same thing as
Yeah.
you
No. Yeah.
the housing
Yeah.
being disrupted. If that kind of makes sense. And so
Yeah, no, it does. And thank you for answering that question because, like, this is like no one really asks these questions, especially like a b-boy, like why. But I mean, it's important to me because for me, like, and even for like Mansell Durden, environment and music play a part in like creating dance, right? And that's where I'm going to go to too, because like this environment, right? You're saying this petri dish, and this is the argument I have, and I need to still talk to certain elders. But for instance, like when I hear elders that are born in '65, right, that they tend to do a dance called strutting. It's from Fillmore, San Francisco, the West Coast, Harlem. This is like kind of precursor to popping. When I ask them the music they dance to, oh, Earth, Wind, and Fire, James Brown, they're dancing to the Barkays, and I challenge them. But did you guys listen to the Mexican? You know what I mean? Like, or Babe Ruth, the Mexican, or why would you dance to Apache? Like that doesn't necessarily would talk to them, right? James Brown, maybe Dennis Coffey Scorpio is maybe universally all around a popper, a locker, a b-boy could get down to. But certain songs like the Yellow Sunshine, Nautilus, I don't know if they were necessarily dancing to these songs while the b-boys, and this is where I'm going to kind of mix in kind of the DJ culture of New York, you know what I mean? Where it's like the Loft, the early disco, pre-disco clubs are playing something like Soul Makossa. I'm not sure if they're dancing to Soul Makossa, right? Oh, you're right. No, like, And then there's the one that everyone says that's the Brooklyn theme, which is it's early. How does it go? This is where I'm getting stuck. But anyway, it's these records that no one else is playing.
Right.
Right? Herc is playing, right? I don't know what influenced Herc to play these records, like, the Mexican, I've heard Kraftwerk out here, but then the Mexican, Listen to Me by Baby Huey, like, who's listening out here? Like, it sounds like a country twang. Yeah. No one's trying to hear that shit, right? They rather hear James Brown. They rather hear Rufus Thomas. They're not trying to hear this weird whatever. Again, this is what's so bringing in the early disco culture before it became disco and the hip hop culture. You discuss the music, why in New York it's this music. You know what I mean? Like this type of music.
So I got records, right?
There you go.
Let me pull back. So we got Nina Simone, who's from North Carolina. And I'm sure, Pro, you're going to be with me on this. On this particular album, the song that b-boys break to is called Funkier Than a Mosquito's Tweeter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So we have an artist from North Carolina, funkier than a mosquito's tweeter, having this influence on New York teenagers, this dance that we call breaking, right? Then we have Funky Nassau.
Yeah.
Right? You called it before I did, right?
Yeah.
Funky Nassau. Now, the song on this album that is popular amongst b-boys is Funky Nassau. That's the title of the album. That's the name of the group, and that's the name of the song. And guess where they're from?
The Caribbean.
The Caribbean.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The Bahamas.
Yeah, I don't know if they're that's what I'm saying. I don't know if they're dancing to that. I need to ask, like someone like Tony Basil. Maybe she would know because she was right there with Don Campbell,
But they're dancing in the Bronx to this. We know that, right?
Right.
You referenced Manu Dibango. Soul Makossa is the song that b-boys break to. This guy is from Cameroon. So we have Cameroon, the Bahamas, and the South. In New York City, specifically the Bronx. You don't have it in Compton, California. In Compton, California, what you have is Funkadelic. You have Sly and the Family Stone.
Bay Area for sure. Like that's right. Like yeah.
You
Power. Like,
Right. So you have what a Black American in the comment section of this YouTube live would consider as Black music. But that's because areas like Compton had dense Black American populations. Contrast that with areas like the Bronx, New York City, or where I came up from, Jackson Heights, which I still live here. You had a mixture of ethnicities, not just one. You had a mixture living together. So obviously, if the kid I go to school with, the Black American kid, has this album by Nina Simone, who's from the South because of his parents, and then the girl I'm dating that's from the Bahamas, hypothetically, I go to her house and her mom is playing Funky Nassau, a group from the Bahamas. And then one of my best friends is African and is putting me up on Manu Dibango. That's the beauty of New York City in the 1970s. You had a mixture of different ethnicities, people from different backgrounds living together, actually living not just together, but on top of each other,
right?
right? I grew up in a tenement building and I lived on the 6th floor. So next door to me, there was an Italian family. On the other side of the building, I was best friends with a kid named James from Ecuador. Across the street from my building, my first girlfriend was Puerto Rican. Her name was Delilah. And I would go to her house and she would play salsa because, well, her mom would play salsa because they were from Puerto Rico. And salsa is a Puerto Rican genre of Latin music. Then on the other side of her building, there was a kid named Stefan that was Jewish. And I remember eating matzah for the first time at Stefan's house. Adjacent to my tenement building, there was a house and there was a Chinese family there. So on one block, you had the United Nations.
Right.
And so obviously you're going to be introduced to different styles of food, different styles of music, different styles of dress. And that's why hip hop, to answer your question, started here. Hip hop is an amalgam of different experiences, and those different experiences were the result of the different people that come from different backgrounds that lived not just together, but on top of each other in tenement buildings, in projects. And so that's why the book is called The City of Hip Hop, not just, the culture of hip hop, but the city of hip hop, because this culture is a product of New York City specifically. Otherwise, we would be talking to people that were cutting it up like Ramsey Theater in the Bronx in the South or on the West Coast or in Chicago. We don't. And there's a reason for that.
Well, I mean, part of it is like, the merry-go-round that Cool Herc came up with. And it's like, and no, it wasn't August 11th, right? It was probably 75-ish at the Hevalo, right?
I think so.
Like when he came up. I mean, that's for sure.
Right.
So when I interviewed B-Boy Sasa, right? And even Dancing Doug, who was at Cindy's party, he was at the August 11th. He would say, we were doing our burning dance. Trixie was one of the guys, but it wasn't until the Hevalo where it was Sasa. He was supposedly, I got to get the facts straight. He was the first one to kind of take the burning dance to the next level and kind of hit the floor, like more, like because of the merry-go-round, and at the same time, the difference between a regular party and Herc's party, because Herc's party played this music that nowhere, even Charlie Rock would say that he was playing this music that they would not hear anywhere else, which would be, what's that? Rob, you can tell me what this, Mokosa, there's that one song. Is it
Are you
Somakosa? It's like a
referencing
Sumo.
Somakosa? Yeah.
But there's like a different version. Like that was, he was like, everyone would chant my name. Here comes Dancing Doug. Like that was his theme at a Herc party, right? And which is, again, like you said, like more of an African influence, right?
Right.
Sasa's favorite song is a song called Voodoo Non. He's like,
Okay.
when that song comes on, and there's again this kind of Caribbean beat, right? That's what it was like, kind of like it wasn't just the James Brown give it up,
Of
turn loose,
course it
which they
wasn't.
loved, but Sasa was like Voodoo Non, and I did the research, and it was just like this hardcore, mixing that Clive Stubblefield like kind of like ghost note, boom bap
Yeah.
sound with these, with the conga and the bongo and stuff like that. And yeah, and so Sasa was the first one to kind of, and dubbed the first b-boy by Coco Rock and Herc. He was the first official. They called him a b-boy because back then it was just they're going off, they're boyoing, whatever.
Right.
So I only say that because that music and that merry-go-round that Flash took to the next level, and I mean, this is the precursor to like, extending the break, right? Like that's what Flash is known for, right? Which is you're able to like. Dancing Doug even said when that started to happen, we stayed on the ground or we tried to find it because we ran out of moves. Like that was his thing. We ran out of moves. There was only so much you could do on top, and this beat is just
Right.
hitting you continuously, right? That used to last 10 seconds, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to touch on that you referenced was Kool Herc's merry-go-round, and we're on the verge of entering another hip hop anniversary, right?
Oh, that's
On
right. That's
August
right.
11th.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to be clear on something while we're on the topic. People have this misconception that Kool Herc was cutting up doubles
Right.
and looping them the way Grandmaster Flash was, and he did not do that.
Right.
The merry-go-round is basically him taking the needle. So Sol Makosa is the third track on side 2, right? He would take the needle without headphones because the majority, if not all of the mixers that DJs like Kool Herc, Grounds of Theodore, Grandmaster Flash were playing on at their parties didn't have Q switches. A Q switch is a switch that allows you to plug in your headphone jack to the mixer and pre-hear the next song that you're about to drop so that you could cue it up the way the disco DJs would cue it up, the beginning of a song, and then drop it at the spot that you want the song to come in. Herc will say in interviews, I didn't have a mixer with a Q switch, so I was dropping without headphones. So when people think merry-go-round, they're thinking, oh, he was just looping these beats over and over and over again. And it's not that he was looping the beats, and they definitely weren't on time or on beat. It's just that he would drop the needle as close to the start point of a track and then guess where the song started. And a lot of times just move the fader over randomly and it be maybe halfway through the break, maybe not even in the beginning, because he's not able to cue up to the start point of the break. Why? Because he's not using headphones. A lot of times DJs back then would also put their ear to the needle and try to hear the sound coming off the record, projecting from the needle, not a headphone, but literally from the needle, just skating around the wax. And then hopefully hear the beginning of a song or the part where a break starts and then drop. Flash, the reason why we revere him so much, opposed to someone like Disco King Mario or Pete DJ Jones, is because Flash was resourceful. He, like Herc, didn't have a mixer with a Q switch. So the folklore is he went to a Radio Shack, bought the parts to build his own external Q switch, which was basically like a little mini monitor speaker. And that monitor speaker allowed him to hear the incoming song that he wanted to queue up to play. And that's what hip hop DJing is. Hip hop DJing is being resourceful. It's not just letting a song play from beginning to end. It's also the synergy that you have between the DJ and the breaker. And so why don't we, people like myself and you, Pro, reference a Disco King Mario or a Pete DJ Jones or Hollywood as being pioneers of hip hop DJing? They were basically letting the music play. At most, they were mixing. And if you're going to consider mixing or letting a song play from beginning to end hip hop, then you also have to reference Italian DJs that were in discos like Francis Grasso or David Mancuso at the Loft or Nicky Ciano. These guys were in discos too, like Hollywood, like Pete DJ Jones, and they were mixing. So why don't we also lump them into the narrative of the originators or the pioneers of hip hop? No, it's because Charlie Rock was not breaking at those parties, and none of those DJs were scratching. And scratching is an ingredient of hip hop DJing. Breaking is an ingredient of the culture. Rapping to a DJ cutting up doubles of Soul Makosa is another ingredient of the culture. And we added graffiti, or they, Bam, Fab Five Freddy, added graffiti later. But these are the core ingredients of what makes up these are the core ingredients of what makes up the culture. So if you're popping and locking on Soul Train, you're doing a dance, but popping and locking are not ingredients of hip hop culture.
No, even in the dance, this is what no one understands. Within the last 25 years, because it became competition based, we had to isolate the dances. So it became not popping and locking, even though that was whatever. It's popping separate. That's from LA. Locking is from LA. Popping, there's just like there's disputes in breaking with rocking and rocking and breaking, which is separate dances because it came, and burning. That's another element.
Right.
Then you have locking, strutting, and then popping from Fresno. So there's already that debate within that. Just to kind of circle back to someone in the comments told me the Brooklyn anthem is "Love is the Message," and that's what I was trying to get. Like, "Love is the Message" was the kind of the Brooklyn anthem. And since you're talking about the Italian DJs, this kind of leads to Rasul's, like, the kind of departure of hip hop. Now we're going to kind of talk about the phase of disco and the music that they were playing. Right? They weren't just playing. These DJs, I believe, played certain music that they weren't playing nowhere else as well. Right? I believe.
I mean, I think what we're, touching on. So one, what's happening in New York, besides what we were alluding to with the external forces, tied to city and policing and so forth, that's unique, right? In certain ways, right? So we think about the subway system. There's not a subway system really in Los Angeles or in Houston or in Atlanta, but there is, a train system in Chicago. But the thing is Mayor Daley, it was already doing strong police enforcement in Chicago that was not yet happening in the early phase of graffiti tagging of a large, subway car in New York City. It was not until Ed Koch, who comes into New York as a mayor, who is the person who brings New York out of the financial crisis after Beam. He then issues a war on graffiti, but Richard Daley had already had strong police enforcement from the mid 60s. And so the whole train car artwork of graffiti could not emerge in a Chicago, right? Way, because they would have been shot on sight or arrested, whereas, the artists in New York were able to cultivate the art enough prior to the enforcement happening. Everybody was, who was into graffiti all throughout the country was already, doing work on buildings, right? And had levels of difficulty and so on based upon the property owner and the abandonment of the building. But the subway cars is a classic example of what was happening uniquely in New York and how the subway cars then were traveling all around that then would inspire another artist or emerging artist in another borough because the train is moving from one part of New York to another. Just kind of touch on the different elements. And so that's
Right.
what we're saying is that we're not saying that DJing started in New York. We're not saying that floor work started in New York. We're not saying that rapping and scatting started in New York. We're saying that it's only in New York that these things were now being put together in conversation with each other, which is also why if we say that there's any important date, that's why we say December 8th, 1971 becomes so important because it's the peace meeting that these gangs in the Bronx decide to have because they were so abandoned by the city in terms of fire department, emergency care, and so forth. And they were engaging there in their own war and conflict. And so they wanted to bring their peace together. I know you mentioned earlier about the Black Panther Party. All of the older teens and younger adults were already being removed from the streets because during this particular time period, the Panthers and the Young Lords had already been sort of pursued by both the state government and federal government. In New York City, specifically, the Panther 21 case doesn't even get wrapped up until between 71 and 73. They start sort of making inroads to remove, what the trumped up charges that they were sort of being, pressed down on. And the Young Lords who had transitioned to Puerto Rican liberation, they were so they were removed because they were going through, their own sort of efforts to sort of take their movement forward. So these young people who were in the Bronx in particular didn't have any, have mentorship, or programming, and so they're out there on their own. So they hold this peace meeting as a way to resolve their differences. It's somewhat, successful in the sense that it did bring these people together. And one of the agreements that they made was to then hold parties together to maintain the peace. The peace wasn't like, absolutely perfect, and it wasn't completely sort of resolved, but it did allow people to now finally travel from one borough to another without being killed, which is then how people even get to a Kool Herc party, that he's, spinning in 1973. But that's happening. That's unique. That's something that's very, uniquely happening. And so this peace party, the peace party that was in gymnasiums is the location, and then that the DJing, that culture that was coming from other particular places, not just the sort of equipment, but the record selections that people had been picking up from Mancuso and Grasso at the Loft, and then of course later in the 70s you had the Paradise Garage, 77, 78. You hearing these selections from these older people who had been seasoned. They're integrating that in with these gymnasium parties. The gymnasium parties then turn into ballroom, parties, right? Because they needed bigger space, they needed a stage for performances, and the performances were emceeing, and also, dance crews. And I know, Rob had brought this up in another talk a while back in terms of none of the flyers even say hip hop. It's not until the 80s that you begin to sort of see hip hop emerging on flyers, especially after the Village Voice article that is featured in. So I think sometimes people may get confused in thinking that we're saying that this stuff started in New York, and we're saying that it comes together in New York. And particularly these teens from the peace meeting are then bringing all these things that they were doing. They were doing graffiti. They were doing different types of, they had different types of dance crews based upon the different music that they were sort of listening to. They had their own unique MCing that wasn't calypso, battle rap, rapping, or some other particular type of scatting, and all this type of. So they're bringing all that into these parties, and the outgrowth of the parties then it gets imitated from one group to another, from one borough to another. And so then by the time we get to the end of the 70s and early 80s, you have this sort of synergy that's happening where you have people who is a graffiti. They're a graffiti artist, but they're also,
Yeah.
a breaker, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Or they're a DJ and they're a graffiti artist,
Or they're all above.
Yeah,
They're all above.
and so that's what's also so not only are these forces that are pressing down these people unique to New York at this specific time period, but it's also a way in which people are responding to those forces that's also unique, because there were certain ways to push back against certain forces that wasn't the case. They weren't able to do it in the same way in these other particular places, and so they were able to connect across cities that it wasn't there in LA. LA, as we still know, is still sprawled, and so it's hard to have people from one particular city, because most people think everything is LA, and no, we know.
Oh yeah. Oh no.
If
If you're from Northern California, it's like, nah, we're different. Like, I mean, you talked about the immigration opening up in the 70s. Like, I'm a product of that, right? Like, my mom came from the 70s. A lot of people from Southeast Asia came to California, right? If it was like in the East Coast, it's the Caribbean and the islands, then we're coming from, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Cambodia. Yeah.
And some of those Southeast Asian communities were already, present. So people like your mom are coming, and they're not coming as the first timers.
No. Oh yeah. Second. Yeah.
Bro, let me ask you. Sorry to interrupt you, Rasul.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Pro. Your parents immigrated to America and settled in Oakland, you said?
No, in San Francisco.
In San Francisco.
I just reference Oakland because of the Black Panthers and stuff like that.
I've
been there, obviously. It's like real quick. Like, if you look at the Bay Area, it's like we're very similar to New York, right? As far as like what we call San Francisco, that would be Manhattan. Oakland would be Brooklyn. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, that's where we kind of relate, right? There's a bridge that takes us from the main city to Oakland. So the cool parties happen in Oakland. Like, that's just like, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Q-Bert's from San Francisco as well, right?
Yep.
And he's Filipino too, right?
Yep.
Shortcuts from San Francisco as well, right?
Yep.
He's Filipino too, right?
Yep.
Mixmaster Mike is from San Francisco as well, right? He's Filipino and I believe German.
Yep.
D Styles is based in San Francisco too.
Yeah.
But I think lives in LA now.
Yeah.
He's Filipino as well, right?
Yes.
Let me ask you this. When your parents settled in San Francisco, were there other ethnicities? Like, was it just as densely populated with blacks? I'm talking about the area that you settled in. Like, what?
Oh yeah. No,
what did you see there? What did you see?
The first neighborhood was a black neighborhood. Like, when I was like from like born to like about 9, and then moved to a neighborhood that was mostly Mexican.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's all over the place.
When you say black, do you mean black diaspora or black American?
I couldn't tell you. That was 50 years ago. It was like 45 years ago. I didn't ask that. You know,
that's the interesting thing about a lot of the debates that are taking place, and even here in the comment section, things that I'm seeing. You have people that are like, hip hop is black culture, period. But if you listen to Play That Beat, Wizkid, it opens up with punk, rock, new wave, and soul, pop music, salsa, rock and roll, calypso, reggae, rhythm and blues, master mix those #1 tunes.
Right.
They're referencing every genre of music. It's not opening up with hip hop is black culture. You know what I mean? Like, it's highlighting and saluting different music from different ethnicities, because hip hop is an amalgam. So although all of these different Filipino families settled here in America, in a place like San Francisco, somewhat of a major city, you had Filipinos also living next door to other ethnicities. It wasn't just one ethnicity. And that is what's beautiful about the Bronx specifically. But with the Bronx, you didn't just have blacks, Mexicans, and Filipinos. You had, like Rasul referenced earlier in this conversation, you had remnants of families that were left over that couldn't take part in white flight. Irish families, Polish families, Italian families also in the Bronx. And a lot of the kids that were growing up in the Bronx that couldn't leave because of this influx of black and brown people that stayed, guess what? Went to school with the Grandmaster Flashes and the Cool Hercs and the Busy Bees and the Charlie Chases. Now, were there a lot of them? Obviously not. And no one can deny that black Americans or black people, period, diaspora blacks, are not the vanguards of this culture, because they are. But to say Latinos weren't around, it just doesn't make sense when you look at the city. When you look at the city, or just look at pictures of the 1970s Bronx, you see Puerto Rican flags hanging from buildings. We have a picture of from Joe Conzo of a Puerto Rican flag hanging from a building, you know? So these different ethnicities, these people that come from different backgrounds live together. And what hip hop is you bringing your personal experience to the table through the medium of dance, spoken word, music, art. And if enough people do that, then you have like all this crazy shit happening and all this crazy music that people are listening to, that if you just grow up in an area of America that's populated by one or two or three races, you're not going to get. And that's what makes New York City so special.
I mean, I like the book is like the why, and I like that you guys are describing that the why, like the
Yeah,
why this happened. Yeah, the
yeah.
why.
I'll come back to the Bronx, but I mean, one of the reasons why I think the Bronx does emerge is because also certain things that's happening just before that in some other particular parts. And so, we have San Juan Hill. People who are not familiar with New York, San Juan Hill is a location of what we now know of as the Lincoln Center, where they have the major sort of art, the three different main buildings for performing arts and so forth, where they have award shows. Well, that was a neighborhood. And they completely decimated that neighborhood area. Now that neighborhood area is literally, and that decimation of it is captured in the West Side Story, the 1961. Like they're actually dancing in one of the abandoned and leveled housing projects. So they flatten the sort of ground of rubble. They remove the rubble for their dance routine. So when you look at the sort of behind the scenes filmmaking of the original 1961 West Side Story, you're literally seeing displacement happening live of San Juan Hill. And it's called San Juan Hill, not just because of the large scale Black Puerto Rican sort of community that's present there, but also a lot of the African American war veterans that were sent to reoccupy Puerto Rico on behalf of the United States Army. They were all living in San Juan Hill and were completely sort of moved out of the area to build the Lincoln, Memorial Center.
Wow.
I'm bringing it up because that neighborhood area, likely, if that had been left alone, that might have been the neighborhood area that some of these things would have emerged in, as opposed to the Bronx.
I see. Okay.
Because it was there, the culture was there. You had families, had strong sort of, businesses that had already sort of emerged, and there was music culture that was there, a good jazz scene, underground jazz scene that was present there in that particular community. And so by 1961, when the film is out, that entire neighborhood is gone. It's kind of captured a little bit in a different way in the remake of the West Side Story, because it
I
opens
haven't
up.
seen that one. Yeah, I haven't seen that
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
it's not good. It's not
Yeah,
good.
it's not good.
Yeah, but I mean, but think about the dance routines that are in the West Side Story. They were ripping that straight from the neighborhood residents there, and of course, we know the cast. There was only one Puerto Rican person from the sort of neighborhood area. But what I'm getting at is that um, again, we cannot deny that the populations of people um, added and brought traditions from wherever they were coming from, whether it was Alabama, whether it was from Puerto Rico. What we're saying is that it's coming together in a certain way that's unique to New York and not what's happening in other particular spaces in another particular city. This is
Right.
why it's not happening in Alabama. It's not happening in Montgomery, or it's not happening in New Orleans. New Orleans had its own time period of a synergy of something to create jazz, right? Which is
Yeah, it didn't
unique.
happen in New York, right? Like,
Right,
Exactly.
exactly, because New Orleans as a port is a different type of port than New York City, and so there were things that emerged in New Orleans that allowed jazz to emerge in New Orleans and not emerge in New York City. You know what I mean? So that's
yeah,
what we're
yeah,
saying, that it's something unique that's happening in the 60s and 70s in New York City, and then specifically coming back to the Bronx. So this rubble is part of the construction for the Cross Bronx Expressway project and two other expressway projects. And so they demolished all these roads, did not clean the rubble up while they're building this new expressway, and they left the rubble for over a decade. So we're talking from 67, 68, all the way until like 81, 82. These images
it's a
of
long
this
time.
rubble. Yeah, you know what I mean? So
It's a
you
long
have
time.
you have children like growing up in the midst of this rubble. And of course, it goes into a narrative of these people being dirty and filthy and so forth. But like these people aren't responsible for these rubble, and they shouldn't be held responsible for cleaning up the rubble, right? But
Neither
yeah,
neither were they responsible for the sanitation department
right,
dumping garbage in
yeah,
the Bronx. Bro, the sanitation department was using the South Bronx as a dumping zone for the city's garbage.
That's
and
crazy.
and to Rob's point, still to this day. So while they were doing that unofficially back then, this is why in the present day, the Bronx is the main location for the waste
Oh wow.
management for the city. Two of the major landfill areas are in the Bronx to this day. So this is why the asthma rate for children in the Bronx is so high because of the air pollution and the quality of the air. I mean, still right now to
Yeah.
the present. But it begins with this city abandonment in the 70s with all these city services. But these populations are unique. Like so, the Italian population that's in the Bronx are the generation of Italians that were anti-fascist in Italy,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah.
because the
They
Italians that
fled. Yeah.
the Italians that were in Manhattan were the pro-fascists. These because remember LaGuardia
Mm.
was a major mayor of New York City, but he was also a lover of Mussolini, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so the Italians who were in the northern part of the city in the Bronx protested, came down to Manhattan, protested, and then they were forcibly pushed back up.
Right. Yeah.
And but I'm saying anti-fascist because the graffiti work isn't about just putting your name up. It's about a commentary against, governmental systems. And so you have these young people who are being influenced by their parents in terms of the word graffiti is Italian, right? But it also is the tradition of a certain type of art form that was anti sort of fascist dictatorship that emerged in Italy. So it's not just about like what's written in the wall, because we can never sort of track down when did the first writing on the wall come about and how did that trickle down. But we're talking about actual political commentary. We can chart that to the Italian, immigrants that were against Mussolini.
That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
and
crazy.
so they're in the Bronx. So the young Italians that then are part of some of these gangs that are emerging in the Bronx are from those families. Some of the Jewish families that were a part of, strong communist and socialist leanings, they were part of, the Jewish families that were in this area. So anyway, the Cross Bronx Expressway construction pretty much isolates the South Bronx from the rest of the Bronx and rest of New York City. So not only what Rob was saying is you have the city services completely abandoning the city, dumping waste there, leaving the rubble, but also these people can't cross the rubble with a car. They can walk over the rubble,
Right.
so they can even visit friends and relatives in the middle part of the Bronx or the northern part of the Bronx, because the rubble is surrounding the entire Bronx, literally physically surrounding it.
So they're
And,
trapped.
and they're trapped. And then
Exactly.
by the end of the 70s, the Bronx Expressway is up and running. So they can't walk across anymore because there's an expressway there. And so that's why also they were at each other's throats, because they were trapped in that particular space. This is why then there was a gang war,
Right.
that was emerging.
It's
And
all connected. It's a
Yeah.
web. It's a
Yeah.
web. And anyone that doesn't allow for that nuance in terms of the history is taking a machete to a topic that you need a scalpel to dissect. And that's what we're doing in the city of hip hop. We're dissecting these things, right? To the last compound, because to say, oh, it just started with this Jamaican DJ hip hop.
Yeah.
On August 11th, he was playing records and he was a blast at his party. And then other DJs started copying him. You're just doing a disservice to the history of this amazing culture and to the people that lived in the Bronx that created it, but not necessarily because they thought, oh, let's just make this new form of music. They just didn't have anything because of everything that Rasul listed.
Yeah.
They had no access to being creative in a formal way. And so they took to a turntable, or they took to taking cardboard boxes, bro, from a Crazy Eddie electronics store, ripping it up, taping it to cement in a park, and then dancing on that cardboard because of all of these things that we've been talking about. So
Yeah.
it's like hip hop is sort of a byproduct, again, not sort of, it is a byproduct of the city in general, of New York City specifically. And that's why it's wrong, it's incorrect to say, oh, it started in the South. It started, with Black Americans only. There's more to the story than one race or one particular group of people that were marginalized. It was all of the different ethnicities, not just one group, not just one race, that were marginalized in New York,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
gave
Yeah.
birth to this culture. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I just wanted to add to that real quick, Rasul. Like, the thing is, like, so I'm a big nerd about the dance, right? And not just the dance breaking, but like, I am interested in other, like, that's why I was like, we're not, I don't even know if we're gonna have enough time to talk about house. but like, but the whole thing is because like a lot of these debates have started 20 years ago, 25 years ago, because we're trying to define things more. Like that's why we, like someone like me, before all this debate stuff, we were talking about how Brooklyn did this rocking style first, and the Bronx did this rocking style, certain areas. And then even here, like I said, even within California, even Oakland against Fresno, and like, who started what first. So the whole thing is like, it's all interesting to me anyway, because all I do is learn from it and like put myself in these stories. And that helps my art and my expression. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like that's why it's like, as a practitioner, not just a journalist, not just a historian, but listening to you, it's like, oh man, you're giving me a different angle to kind of draw inspiration from. You know what I mean? And the reason why.
Yeah, no, and so I think one of the things, again, Rob and I had tons of collaborative conversations because that was what was needed. We had to keep talking out to each other, like where not to go down, or what we saw as an issue in this documentary or in this book. So, we had to read these other books that were out
Mhm.
there. And one of the things that I know I brought back to Rob after sort of reading all these like hip hop pedagogy books or hip hop history books or whatever else was everybody wanted to start with who was the first rapper, or who was the first person to scratch. That's where they wanted to start the conversation about one that's so difficult to peg down, especially because you had to. I mean, there's just it's so difficult to get confirmation and corroboration of like
It's a
what
lot of
really happened.
research. You got to interview a lot of people. Like,
Yeah, and especially it's not, and it's almost in some cases almost too late because some of these people have died, right?
mhm.
Like we needed to really something needed to have been done or written on this in 79, 81, 85. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
And like tried to gather images and so forth. All we can do is do some stuff retrospect, but we didn't want to sort of do a book on the culture of hip hop. You know, we did it as Rob said on the city of hip hop. And so what I was trying to sort of get at with that particular point is this whole idea that um, we can't start with who was the first to do the thing. What we can find evidence of are the things that were around that either set up and provided resources for people to do certain things, the possibility of doing certain things, or the forces that were pushing up against a population to make them want to respond in a particular way. And that's what we have the evidence of that, and that's why the book uniquely sort of
yeah.
touches on these policies, the time period of certain things that's happening. And so if we want to ever do a book on, let's say, hip hop LA history, we have to, or California history, we have to account for the U.S. Filipino War, and the immigrants that either were forcibly brought over to the United States to work, in the different
Oh man, there's a lot. There's that story. Holy crap!
right, because I mean, because who are the children who are going to end up doing lock-in and so on? They're either the children or the grandchildren of these farmers, right? Because these farmers were the earliest sort of people to create a community, have a viable income, have a house, be able to sort of send money back to a family member or have family members come back over, right? And then we got the same thing when we sort of think about other sort of populations. When we think about all of California, but specifically San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, that whole sort of area. Specifically in Chicago, when we sort of think about house music in particular, when we think about house music there, it's not just about when Frankie Knuckles
Hmm.
comes from under the tutelage of Larry Levan in New York, and he starts DJing in the warehouse. Like that's not it, because it's not like he just comes over, he comes into this building, he turns play on, and then all of a sudden people from the streets just hear it and they walk up into, you
Right.
know, Paradise Garage. There was already DJs that were doing things in Chicago. They were already playing music. There was already a dance culture in Chicago. What ends up happening for the warehouse is a certain age group now has access to a space. Same thing that was happening in New York. The Paradise Garage was the first space that wasn't Studio 54, that was
Hmm.
exclusive and for a
Right.
certain class,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the loft was before Paradise Garage, that gave the whole sort of sense that everybody is welcome. Everybody can come to a particular space. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to have anything. You just have to come and enjoy and respect the vibe. The Paradise Garage took that whole concept and increased it to a magnitude. Yes, Frankie Knuckles comes up under Larry Levan, in terms of that, while Larry Levan had learned from Nicky Siano and Vinny Cuso, and he brings, that work to Chicago because Robert Williams, who owns the warehouse, heard him spinning, heard Larry Levan spinning, couldn't get Larry Levan, and Larry Levan recommended Frankie Knuckles, right? But he knew that the population to come to a Paradise Garage wasn't the public school teacher who, the middle
Hmm.
class income. It was the high schooler, who didn't have any outlet or any particular space to sort of, go to, right? But not a high schooler that was wealthy, a high schooler that was, from a working class household, and so now this venue sort of does that. Now, one of the things I want to, probably sort of, help you with the segue in is it's not the same. Hip hop is not the same as house culture or
Right.
jazz culture
Right.
because remember hip hop, especially in our book, we say it's a synergy of these elements. Doesn't mean all four elements as a synergy, but it has to be at least a synergy of at least two. Whereas in house, it is a sort of a music and dance, but there's not like an automatic aspect of visual art that's
Right.
tied to house music. Why? Because we couldn't bomb the train systems, right? And because the police, department of Chicago had been far stronger at the time period of the 60s and 70s now and the 80s, more than New York Police Department that hadn't yet become the New York Police Department that we know in the present day. But we mentioned in the book, but the Fraternal Order of Policing, specifically in New York, really doesn't emerge until as a response to the city cutting their salaries in the mid 70s. That's how they actually emerge as a strong force because they respond by having these Fear City campaigns. So they would put these posters for all these tourists into the airports and the hotels saying, the city doesn't care about your safety, and this is why they're not paying us. So come to New York at your own, risk. So yeah,
Right. Right.
you can actually look it up. It's called Fear City. They had these posters with a skull, on it, warning tourists to come to New York. The police department, but the fraternity, the union of the police department is the one that came up with this campaign to scare people from not coming to the city. But they were trying to scare people from not coming to the city to force the city to reinstate their salary,
Right.
not because there was a legitimate issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They wanted the
That's
most. They
crazy.
wanted their money, right? And so I'm saying like, and so what people, so to wrap up, the whole idea of what I'm trying to bring up is that people think the political conversation to have is who started what, who was the first MC, and what we're saying with the book is, no, man, y'all missing the whole point, which is these things are in a response to forces that did not want and did not care about any of these particular people, uh,
Exactly.
the first person that dies is tied to hip hop is Michael Smith, who was a graffiti artist, and the police capture him because he jumps over a subway gate and they beat him, so much so that he dies from his injuries. And that's like the first person that we can sort of think about as a death tied to hip hop.
Can I piggyback that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go for it, man.
In 1975, January, Solsky, Africa Bambaata's best friend, was murdered, Ronald Bethel, by police. January 1975. By November, Africa Bambaataa starts the Zulu Nation. Why? Because his friend was murdered by police, and he realized, like, yo, we're out here dying on these Bronx streets. I want this shit to stop. So I want to create a movement that's opposite or counter to what a gang movement would be. I want to create a movement full of people that just want to be creative and do positive things in the same streets that my friend was murdered in. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, to talk about hip hop in terms of who was the first guy to do a backspin, who was the first person to go down to the floor, who was the first person to scratch or play breaks, is doing a disservice to a rich and sad history. You know what I mean? And poignant events that have taken place in this concrete jungle that we call New York. And when you're conflating it down to like these who did what first debates, again, you're doing a disservice to the larger undertones of what created the space for someone to decide to break on cardboard in a park. You know
Right.
what made b-boys walk over to an electronics store and take cardboard and rip it up and tape it to cement, right? What made someone pick up a mic instead of a chain or a gun? What made Flash turn to the turntable and use it as an instrument opposed to picking up a formal instrument? That's what we're talking about.
Right.
Like the
Right.
what, the why,
Right.
the
Right.
how, the where, the when. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
Because since I would say 2020, since the pandemic, when people were locked up in their homes and experiencing hip hop synthetically on their smartphone, and because they're talking about it, they think, oh, well, I'm a part of this culture. And it's like, no, bro, hip hop isn't something that you consume through your phone. Hip hop is what you create on the street. It's an analog experience. And you got kids debating with practitioners like me and you, Pro, that never went to a b-boy battle,
Yeah.
that never wrote a rhyme, that never risked getting arrested. I have.
I have.
Going to a yard, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I have.
Going to
Like,
a
I ain't gonna
yard
lie.
and
Yeah.
and painting on a train. Yo, I remember once I went to a yard with my older brother, Universal, and we got chased by cops. And I'm like a 10-year-old kid, and he's like pulling me because I'm not fast enough, like pulling me by my jacket, like, Rob, we got to get the fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying? Like people that think they're authorities on hip hop history because they identify as Black American. And it's like, yo, you've never been in the trenches. You don't know what this shit is about. You know what I'm saying? And not only that, I personally I started out as a b-boy like you in 1979. I was 8 years old, had my brother mentoring me, teaching me how to b-boy. By 81, I was writing graph with my brother and his friends, going to yards, running away from cops. By 83, I decided, yo, I want to DJ. And again, I asked my brother to teach me how to DJ because he was my in to this culture. Hip hop isn't a birthright. Just because I was born and I'm Black doesn't mean that all of a sudden I have this birthright to this culture. My brother had to usher me into it. His friends had to approve of me and make sure that I was cool to be down and be around them when they
I
were
mean,
in the yard.
there is that hazing phase,
There's
right?
a
Like
hazing
you're a
phase.
toy. If
Right,
you're a toy, you
exactly.
have no say. Like
So
you're in the kiddie pool, whatever the thing is. You go practice with your little one.
exactly,
You're not in the big. You have to join the big boy circle or the big boy cipher, or you're gonna mix with this DJ. Because if not, get the hell out of here. Like you're
exactly.
gonna get
So you
smoked.
had to
Like that's what
be
it was.
hip hop was something that hip hop was something that you experienced and interacted with in the streets, in a hallway of a tenement building, at a house party, not on your phone, bro. You know what I mean? So you got kids now in the last 6 years, right? That think because they were born a certain color or in a certain country that their authorities or they have this right to say who's a part of the culture or not. And they didn't even live in New York City during the 1970s to be able to like understand what it was like, the fact that it was diverse. You know what I'm saying? So to Rasul's point, bringing it back to deaths, people dying, people becoming martyrs for generations like mine to be able to sit in front of you, Pro, and talk about this culture. That's what we're getting into and diving into in the city of hip hop is, yo, it's not just a creative medium of expression. This is a culture that marginalized people turn to say I am, to find their voice in this fucking crazy world that we live in.
Oh yeah,
You know
I
what I'm
mean it's
saying?
big.
And to do it left to their own devices. That's the beauty of hip hop, is you don't need to attend a school. You don't need to attend a ballet school to dance. You don't need to attend an art school to paint. You don't need to attend a music school to play music. You're just gonna figure out a way to redefine the purpose of a turntable. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
morph it into an instrument. And you're gonna take cardboard and tape it to the ground and dance on that shit if you can't dance on pristine wooden floors at a ballet school. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
that's what this culture is. It's being resourceful. It's taking nothing and turning it into something. It's alchemy.
And that's why we see it when it does travel. Where does it start first? It doesn't
Oh
start.
yeah. I mean,
It
yeah.
doesn't start in some
Always.
upper middle class wealthy
Always.
spaces. You know, I mean,
Always. Those who
early
haven't traveled the world, like
yeah.
you'll see it.
Early '80s. It emerges in Sao Paulo already. You know what I'm saying? You know, breaking is already emerging. We have images of people breaking in Sao Paulo. They're already having big scale competitions in early '80s, right?
Mhm.
Same thing in terms of when Fab Five Freddy connects a lot of sort of b-boy crews to be able to travel over to Europe. It
Mhm.
picks up in not only in south parts of London and east side of
Mhm.
London, massive amounts of immigrant populations,
Yep.
but it also emerges up in Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, and Leeds, also in same types of neighborhood areas. When it goes to Germany and Berlin, when it goes to Paris,
Oh yeah, big. Yeah.
and now we got the World Cup, and there's this great sort of piece from Terry Henry who talks about the northern suburbs that he grew up in, and the northern suburbs has been classically, the black French speakers from Haiti and
Mhm.
West Africa, the Algerian populations, and Moroccan populations that are
Yep.
all there. Well, who is picking up different aspects of hip hop elements in Paris? It's not the people in the central part of Paris, it's the people in that northern suburb
Right.
that at the same time that they're sort of picking up the game of football, soccer, they're also picking up,
Oh yeah.
you know what I mean? Yeah, everybody can pick, everybody eventually does appreciate it. So it does go to the suburbs, right?
But in those early years, it was kind of the
But where
kids.
it start,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it always
Oh
starts
yeah.
in every sort of place. This is why, and so the one thing that the phone has done outside of the United States has been able to allow people to see it as an expression for their conditions, and so this is why we saw in 2020 during the pandemic MCs from Mumbai, starting to become known to us here. It's not like they first started MCing in 2020, but we started seeing them because they were using the phone as a way to record their work, right? This is why, even without music, we were seeing, breaking happening in Gaza City, right?
Oh
Amongst young,
yeah. Oh yeah.
all
Easy.
during, yeah,
Yeah. Easy.
this is, and so that's another part of what we also bring
And
up in
that's
the
what
book.
people don't really see. Like when you're coming from my perspective, like when you see it, like it would always be like why, like Brazil was a perfect spawning ground for good b-boys. Like there's a lot of excellent b-boys and b-girls from Brazil and Colombia. Like there's these reasons. And I used to like when you see it from marginalized people, period, from wherever all the world, they tend to gravitate to hip hop first and then they excel. Like that's kind of the form that's been it the last 25 years. You kind of saw that.
That's
So
the
like,
neutralizer.
And speaking of Brazil, and this is where people sometimes I think, and that's what I was kind of criticizing people get wrong and get silly, is that people would say then in Brazil, the reason why it emerges in Brazil is because, especially with the floor work with capoeira, like, no, man, like it's not because of capoeira that
no, I mean they
emerges.
might be practicing and get good at it first, but like you get good at it fast, but it's related but separate at the same time, you know, like
Exactly. I mean, but again, like what's happening in Brazil during the time that people are picking up MCing and breaking in the early '80s. You
like if
had
you want to see 90s like style, 80s like how it was, go to South America and see hip hop there. Oh, it's more hip hop than
Go
America. Like
go to Medellin.
all these
yeah.
dictators. It was all
Go
these
to
dictators.
Medellin right now, Colombia. Medellin, Colombia. It feels like the Bronx
That's what
1970s.
I mean, I went to New York in '87, and I could tell you it's not the same New York now. And when I go
No,
out
not at
there,
all.
it's like, oh
Yeah,
shoot,
right,
it's like, oh, what
right.
the hell? Like this
And the
reminds
thing
me.
about it is, I went to Medellin, and there's that element of danger. Like you're
Yeah, oh
looking
yeah,
over your shoulder, like, but you're also not leaving the danger. You're there because it's hip hop, and you can't miss out on what's gonna happen. Whether it's like an outdoor park jam or you're in some neighborhood and dudes are b-boying, so you feel that element of danger, but you're still there. You're grounded. You're anchored by the
Mm.
creativity that's taking place,
that
and that's why I say hip hop isn't something that's consumed. It's something you create. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
if you're just talking about it and that's your contribution to this culture is making claims and talking about it. And yo, honestly, I don't mean to, call people out or stand on my soapbox, and this is just a perspective, but even a lot of the first year, second year practitioners that disappeared for
oof,
decades,
yeah,
and now because it's hip hop 50, want to come back and you know exit their caves, and like now they're saying like, oh well, I was doing that in 1973 and I was doing that in 1974. Cool, but as far as, let's say, breaking is concerned, I know that you weren't doing head spins, I know that you weren't doing windmills, I know that you weren't doing 1990s, I know that you weren't doing Thomas Flares. All that came in the 80s.
oh
So
yeah,
it's like you're coming out of your cave and you're trying to take credit for a dance that evolved over a period of time. And that period of time wasn't 1 or 2 years. You know what I'm saying?
oh yeah.
Or
No, it's even within the
right, or
5 years from
right,
75 to 80, it already
exactly.
morphed into something else.
And it
Like
morphed into it morphed into what we know as
and
breaking now.
yeah,
Because when I think of breaking, I think of what second generation Rocksteady
mm,
did in movies like Wild Style and B Street and Flashdance, Dynamic Rockers from Queens, Floor Masters. Those are the foundational moves that I feel went on to, I would say, complete the dance. And so now if you watch a Red Bull battle, right? Yes, what they're doing in modern times is light years ahead of what first and second generation
oh
b-boys
yeah,
were doing,
oh
right?
yeah,
But
oh, yeah.
I would say that what we see now at a Red Bull battle is closer to what we see in a movie like Star Wars or Flashdance than what any first generation b-boy was doing in 1974 or 1975. And that's not me
Mm,
discrediting them. It's me saying another thing that bothers me about all this talk and debate that we're having online is that a lot of the people that are talking are people that are so disconnected from the culture, that don't go to b-boy battles, don't go to DJ battles, don't know about underground MCs, and all they know is the few parties that they went to for a year or two. And it's like, yo, now you're saying that like you're the creator and the pioneer of a culture that you haven't even been a part of for decades.
yeah,
And that bothers me, man.
yeah. I hear it. I hear it. I mean, I still give them respect, man. Like I
No
said,
doubt.
a lot of them, like these, I have their numbers in my phone right now. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
no
That's a
doubt.
different. That's why when the chat talks about this and that, I was like, yo, I have their phone numbers. I could call them. Like these are like
Right.
they're my unks, right? Like they're my
No
big
doubt.
brothers and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
No doubt. But the thing about it that I'm trying to say is that if you are a first generation, let's say DJ, right? And you never scratched, you never got into juggling, body tricks, all the stuff that generations after you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
I don't think you have a creative right to come out of nowhere and be like, yo, I was the first one to do park jams and all you guys are my sons. Like, that's the kind of talk that
Ah,
bothers me,
okay.
because it's like,
Okay.
yo, this stuff evolved over time. And because you were part of some formative year park jams in, let's say, 73, 74, it doesn't take away or reduce the value of what DJs in the 80s, the 90s, and even the 2000s
Okay, and that's
have
why
done.
it's
You know
just
what I'm saying?
giving respect to the evolution as well.
Right.
You know, like, and that's
Everybody.
like, yeah.
And thinking about park jams, like it's a party in the park. How do you pin down the first party in the park that has ever
Oh
happened?
man, that's really
That's
hard.
not possible. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not. I mean, it's not possible. I mean, like
Nah.
that.
Because there's
That
like there could have been like 5 in one day in different parks. Who knows,
Exactly.
right? Like,
and so what we also have tried to do with the book, instead of getting into those debates, in that way, what we tried to do is sort of say, well, at least what can we corroborate from looking at multiple sources, as multiple people were aware of a certain thing happening at a certain particular place at a certain time. Because I mean, think about it with scratching. Can one person really create scratching? It's a record on a turntable. By nature of putting your hand on the record, stopping the record, you're going to get a scratching sound. So to think that has no one else has ever
yeah,
thought about scratching
yeah,
before
yeah.
is silly. But what we can say is, who was the first that multiple people sort of heard
Right,
doing it
right,
particular public space.
right,
That's the same thing as literally saying the first person who ever created, because that's not how culture works. We can never peg down who was the first to literally start talking on a mic, over
right,
music. We can't peg that down. What we can say is, what, these 50 people saw this person for the first time ever put together a series of lines that rhymed in a certain way, and we sort of put it into a song, right? We can sort of allude to that. That does not mean that that's the first rapper, right?
right, right.
Mean, and that's not the first rap. That just means that this is a time point that we can associate with some other particular things that occurred, especially in relation to the city.
Real quick, I have to go teach soon. Sorry about that. I mean, this is going like I thought we were like, oh, we're gonna be done in like an hour 30, and we ended up like going for more. Um, Real quick, man, I just want to thank both of y'all for being on, because I think this is, like I said, so this is a conversation with practitioners that actually care. That's the shame about this. I don't see a lot of Robs out there that are trying to like really talk about it. Like that are figures, you know what I mean? That, like, you know what I mean? And having you on, kind of confirming things, and not even confirming things, but giving me a different perspective on the angle of like what caused this, like kind of the domino effect of like what causes an environment to kind of a reaction to certain stimuli, right? Like, very scientific, and I like that. Real quick too, just to flex a little bit. This is how much like what if you guys don't know Rob's, history, even my history. I'm not as well known as Rob, but speaking of being in Colombia, we were in Colombia together in 2015 at this event called Hip Hop
Hip
Al
Hop Al
Parque.
Parque.
60,000 people. We performed in front of 60,000 people. How many people say that and they have these opinions? I'm like, all right, cool.
Right. Word.
Cool. Do you
Word.
practice it? Like, when you mentioned, like, did I get chased by the cops? Yeah, I got chased for graffiti, for writing all the time. And did I try? I could scratch. I was at D Styles' house bothering him, trying to learn how to do a
Wow.
military scratch. He knows. He's like,
Wow.
I used to go to his
That's dope.
house and be like, all right, how do you do that again? And I was
That's
annoying
dope.
him, but like, you know what I'm saying? And that's why, like I was telling Rob, I just want to have the academia in this too, because it's only so much we could say and then like whatever. But with you in there being a doctor and understanding, and you're pulling out facts like of different cities in different time period, which is like, well, holy crap, this guy really knows his stuff. It's kind of like the mixture of the conversation I wanted. I wanted kind of that. Let's not just have opinions and anecdotal stuff. Let's get actual like facts. And thank you, Dr. Mowatt, for being here and really opening up about that.
Word. Did we just lose
Oh, I
Rasul?
think we.
Oh,
Oh,
there he is.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Well, thank you for having us, bro. I appreciate what you're doing for the culture. I commend you for using your platform to not only promote yourself, but other people, other practitioners.
Oh, yeah.
You said it earlier. You had me as a guest on your show about a year ago, I want to say,
It
if
was like
not
two,
longer.
man. It's
2 years,
actually two
man,
years
time
ago.
flies.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man, you're doing great things. And I personally want to say thank you, bro, for all you've done for the culture of hip
Thank
hop.
you.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, we are so splintered these days. Breakers only associate with breakers. DJs only associate with DJs.
I'm trying,
Rappers,
man.
forget it. Yo, rappers, they're like on a different planet. They don't acknowledge any of the other. They don't acknowledge any of the other elements. And graph writers, I mean, is that even really a thing in terms of hip hop? Like, yes, you see graffiti, but I don't feel like now the writers that like writing the way I experienced it, let's say in the late 1970s and early 80s, obviously it's just not really a thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so every element is sort of on its
Yeah.
own island,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like people like you are trying to keep it together. And that's what I'm trying to do as well. And that's why I always pay homage to breakers, to writers, to MCs, not just DJs, man, because for me, hip hop is an amalgam of 4 ingredients, not just one. You know what I'm saying?
You guys are like my fourth writers on the show. So I've had Jeff Chang on. He came to my
Mhm,
house actually.
mhm.
Chang came to my house. I have Midas who wrote the recent book of Breaking. I've had Michael Holman on, even though he wrote an article, like, and now I have you two on. So I'm like, I'm trying to do just then a hip hopper and top 5 and this and that and
Right.
breaking. Now I'm trying to have like the social political aspect in it too. Like that's what's important to me. So thank you so much, guys. I gotta wrap it up. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. You're watching the trades. Conversation with Rob Swift and Dr. Rasul Mowatt, the city of hip hop. You can find me on Instagram at PureOFO_FLGZ. Peace, and I'll see you guys later. And we out of here. Boom.